Hanyu Mountain Rocks. Jagged mountain crags, narrow pathways. At twilight, as I reached the temple, bats were flying. I climbed to the hall, sat down on rain-washed steps, among great plantain leaves, swollen jasmine buds. The priest informed me of a splendid Buddha painting. He brought a light to show me. I could see it was unique. He spread my bed, shook the mat, prepared soup and rice. Coarse food, but good enough to satisfy my hunger. Late that night, I lay in stillness, insects silent now. The moon rose above the ridge, shining through my door. When daylight came, I left without a path to follow, wandered here and there through heavy mist. Red peaks, jade streams, one after another, brimming over. At last I came to pines and oaks, all of massive span. Barefoot, I trod on stones to cross the streams. Water gurgling, breezes blowing wide my robe. If life could remain like this, a person could be happy. Why are we always tethered to officialdom? A few close friends might get together, settle here, find peace in our old age. So we have here the first poem by Hanyu. He is a new writer in the series that we are reading about. And he has 4 poems in this section. All of them, this one and the 3 that are going to follow immediately after it, are heptasyllabic gushi, which seems to point to the belief, at least by the compiler of the anthology, that this subtype was the forte of Hanyu. Now, who was this poet? He's a very important figure in Chinese tradition. He was a mid-Tang poet, that is, he mainly flourished in the beginning of the 9th century. And he was a major intellectual figure in the Chinese tradition. As a politician, he had a relatively middle upper level position. Yeah, he got to almost ministerial positions in the central government. But his main relevance comes from his writings, especially his prose writings. He became the founder of the Kuwen movement, a movement for the restoration of a more limpid and more simple style in prose writing, as opposed to the ornate and adorned Pianwen style from the 6 dynasties that was still cultivated in official documents in Tang China. His political and ideological views were very important and very influential. He defended a return to the Confucian sources. He was quite hostile to Buddhism. In fact, he almost got executed for a memorial to the emperor in which he insulted one of the Buddha's relics. And he would be, the main influence in succeeding Chinese intellectual developments, basically in Neo-Confucianism, which became the state orthodoxy under the next dynasty. Now, in poetry, he was relatively important. He was quite a good poet, but with much less relevance and importance than as a prose writer. Generally, his style in poetry, as can be seen in this poem, is pretty transparent, pretty limpid, pretty easy to follow. Although he does also have some relatively baroque poems, it seems, when he tries to adjust poetic form and content to the complexity or density of a subject. Now, moving back to this poem, to Mountain Rocks, the topic is pretty clear. This is a landscape poem. It's a poem describing some mountains through which Hanyu is enjoying a little trip, a little stay, with a Buddhist temple included in the middle. So, sub-themes, apart from the description of the landscape, is, evidently the pleasures of the retired life. In fact, the last stanza expresses a quite common, almost trite desire for abandoning the world and continuing the pleasures of this life of retirement. And simplicity, the virtue, the value of simplicity and of pure nature. And also remember, even a simple poem describing the pleasures of trekking in the mountains always has reverberations, connotations, because mountains are sacred spaces in the Chinese tradition, and they always, exploring mountains always and climbing mountains always connects to achieving transcendence, intellectual, personal, religious transcendence from the dust of the world and from worldly ambitions and preoccupations. So let's go to the poem. As I said, it's pretty straightforward. It doesn't use any complex images that I'm aware of. So it reads pretty much like a narrative, really, like almost a prose description, a little bit embellished, of the sights and things that Hanyu enjoyed in this unnamed mountain. Jagged mountain crags, narrow pathways. At twilight, as I reached the temple, bats were flying. So the first images are pretty harsh. So we get views of a harsh mountain landscape with jagged mountain crags, narrow pathways difficult to walk through. And it's twilight, and that would make the walking all the more difficult. Just as the sun sets, the poet has reached his refuge for the night, a temple, and bats are flying, so it's already dark. And this is probably a natural scenery. Well, mountains are mentioned, but it's emphasized probably by the presence of animals. I climbed to the hall, sat down on rain-washed steps, among great plantain leaves, swollen jasmine buds. Just as we get to the temple, nature becomes a bit more subdued, a bit more humanely cultivated, and enjoying the view from the rain-washed steps, the poet sees probably cultivated plants, plantain leaves and jasmines, which are about to bud, very aromatic flowers that would be cultivated because of their wonderful scent, especially close to any building. That's the first stanza. The second stanza leads us into the temple and the night experience. The priest informed me of a splendid Buddha painting. He brought a light to show me. I could see it was unique. So, in the temple, we get some more than religious, almost aesthetic appreciation of a nice painting. Remember, Hanyu was not necessarily anti-Buddhist, except from a political perspective. So he has no problems in staying in a Buddhist temple and enjoying a Buddhist painting and Buddhist hospitality. But, at least in this poem, he seems to be focusing it clearly from the aesthetic more than from the religious point of view. He spread my bed, shook the mat, prepared soup and rice. Coarse food, but good enough to satisfy my hunger. So the monk, in a very friendly manner, prepares the sleeping quarters for Hanyu and even gives him a light meal, which is simple. We're in the mountains. This is the simple life, and this is the simple food of a monastery. But it's good enough. We don't need anything else. Late that night, I lay in stillness, insects silent now. The moon rose above the ridge, shining through my door. So in this image, we get a little bit of the subtopic wakefulness at night, as opposed to the usual presentation of this theme. The poet does not seem to be worried about anything or thinking about anything in special. He's just enjoying a nice night in a peaceful mountain, enjoying the exoticness of pure silence when even the insects stop making noises at night, and enjoying the beautiful moon shining through his door. The pleasures of night in Tang, China. The next stanza takes us to what he did during the day. So the first stanza was arriving at the temple and at the mountain. Second stanza, the night at the temple. Third stanza, the day out in the mountains. And the last stanza will be the philosophical conclusion. When daylight came, I left without a path to follow, wandering here and there through heavy mist. So the poet is not following a path. Probably there are not many paths in this not too frequented mountain. And this free and easy roaming, this free and easy wandering connects with the typical traditions of Taoist and also Buddhist poetry of being free from attachments to the world and just enjoying, letting oneself go in nature and in sacred spaces. Red peaks, jade streams, one after another, brimming over. At last I came to pines and oaks, all of massive span. So we had a list of the typical views. So peaks, streams, they're all big, brimming over, so they are overstepping their bounds, which means the mountains are high and high and high, and the waters are overflowing. And there's also pines and oaks. This is a mountain area. They're not logged for wood, so they can be very big. Barefoot, I trod on stones to cross the streams. Water gurgling, breezes blowing wide my robe. So the poet is one with nature. He crosses barefooted, his bare feet touching the rock as he crosses streams, and wind and water circle around him. Finally, the conclusion. If life could remain like this, a person could be happy. Why are we always tethered to officialdom? A few close friends might get together, settle here, find peace in our old age. So the conclusion, as with many poems about the retired life or about trips, enjoying the pleasure of being around in the mountains, harks on the theme again, on the sub-theme of retirement, on the desire of retirement. A Confucian scholar like Han Yu, he can still think that it would be so nice if only it were possible to leave the responsibilities, one's moral obligations, and enjoy this with some friends. Of course, this is always a desire, a latent desire, but a desire that must be frustrated in a person like Han Yu, with a very strong moral conscience and with a very strong Confucian mind view, in which an individual must serve the state, must serve the community. And Han Yu lived in troubled times. The Tang had almost collapsed after the An Lushan rebellion. During the Zhuangho era, which is when he lived, the state, the nation made a recovery. The emperor was able to recover a lot of his power, and the dynasty seemed consolidated for a bit. But there were big fights with rebel military officers and with other problems and other situations. There was to be little time for respite for Han Yu, but the little he had, he enjoyed, as we can appreciate, as we can see in this lovely poem.